teknolojiyadda dalkaasi ayaa waxay ku sheegtay in tv-ga si news uu muujiyay markaasi magaalooyinka dalkooda iyo ra-iisul wasaarahooda ayagoo ku tilmaamay in ay tahay inay xasho muujiyaan warbaahinta shisheeyuhu islamarkaana madaxda dalka aysan weerarin iskastaba noqotee tv-ga warka laga sida ayaa sheegayay in ra-iisul wasaaraha cilaaqaad wanaagsan uu la leeyahay xisbiga kale ay isku rabaadaynayihiin loo yaqaano the Nepal Communist Party oo ah xisbiga markaasi wadaagga ama xisbiga shuuciga ee Nepal iyo kan kale ee la yiraahdo China Communist Party oo sheegay in labada xisbi ay madaxan wadaagaan sida daradeedna cilaaqaadka sii xumaanaya Hindiya iyo Nepal ay ku leedahay oo markaasi haatan ay dalkaasi cilaaqaadkooda iyaga ay sii rajisteen warka ay soo saartay waxda dhinaca digitalka ee max digital leeyahay iyo tv-ga maamusha ku-xigeenka madaxa guud ee shirkadaasi Dhulka Sharma ayaa u sheegay wakaalada wararka AFP in ay dareemeen wuxuu ku tilmaamay mas'uuliyad saaran in ay difaacaan sharafta qaranka iyo madaxda ugu sarreysa wasiirka wasaaradda isgaarsiinta ee dalkaasi wasiirka maaliyadda labadaba waxaa iyaguna goosii horeysay ku tilmaameen weerarada ka imaanaya dalka Hindiya mid oo kaca labada dal ayaa cilaaqaadkoodu sii xumaanayay berihii guddigiisa oo dhan New Delhi iyo Kathmandu ayaa waxaa cilaaqaadkooda xumeeyey kadib markii dowladda dalkaasi New Delhi ay go'aansatay inay sii ambaqaado waddo ay ka dhisayso goobta ama dhulka la isku haysto ee gobolka loo yaqaano Lubekh oo ah goob la isku haysto deegaanka Lubekh oo ah goob labada dal u dhaxaysa ayaa la sheegay in ku dhawaad 60 kilomitir ay gudaha u gashay dowladda Hindiya oo gudaha oo dhan markaasi loo yaqaano Bixi halka dagaal soo qabaya wararkii caalamiga ah dadka sida carabkooda oo weyn iyo xiriirka ayaa noo soo socda washii laakiin aan hadda Taiwan iyo Mareykanka Taiwan waxa ay heshay markaasi meelmarin qorshaha dhinaca gaashaandhigga ugu ballaaran ee Mareykanka uu siiyo iyada oo cilaaqaadka Mareykanka ay sheegay si xumaan waxda arrimaha dibadda dalka Mareykanka ayaa sheegtay in la adoofay isla markaana la ogolaaday 620 milyan oo doolarka Mareykanka qorshe ku kacayo oo ah in loogu ogolaado كنترى العلماء بنا هرمرك كسمية دفاع إيجابي offensive capability يعني تي باكتي كنترى الوصل قابله وهذا شيء واحدة بنا هنا بدأ دركسي إن أي كنترى المقطوعة كل هري يجي روسيا جاي إلا بعانيه قاب كخلاء صوت هذا تمريكا كو إنسكوجري أما وكشوي أما وكبر مريض يجتاز وركا ونودري كونغرس كذلك أمريكا كوربانيتو أكثر أيام وحال الشيء أنت الأيدي طيب وحلوس فيه إذا تشيد بيع أمريكا كذلك أمريكا كيسير كلاقاتك وإذا تشيل سوتشين كحيوان بين عيالي وشان أما ينسى مكينيست ذلك أما تايوان باليري معرفة على تايوان وحا أي واحد ونقطهم تا اللي سيري سياسة قبل كيتم يسكن ذلك أود يبدأ فقارها الجول كأي واحدة إن على الدفاع ذلك أمريكا كويس في عمر عيار اللي أي نقول الوقرة اللي يرتب واحدة إن على الدفاع أوقع بزم أرمها أمني والشغلات اللي هي Defense Security and Cooperation Agency DSC لوصل قابل وحاكم الله شيء إن كوحدة مركز يقدر أسلي اللوكهيد مارتن كوبس الله شيء إن يدري أبرشها الدفاع المركز وسألت الجاشان جاي تايوان سيرة تايوان أي واحد كشرت الفرق إنه مين هو وأنا شايف إن مش هذا موضوع في كل دور هو بيجي سيرجع بعد بدأ تايوان أي تقول كم العلية طلع ولا قاعدة دولة المركزي وهو شايف ما يكون إني مرة بقى أي كسر على يعني كل سيرة اللي سيا خلاف كلا بعض وسير ماضي وما يكون كشيء كذا ما كبير شيء مي وما كثران كل واقعي إن أي صورة بتحي إن كي سدير يتوان كان طال ونوع مساك عص اللي يقال مركزي MK48 كان نوع اللي يقال مركز تربيس oo ay sheegeen ama turbeeyo loo yaqaan oo ay sheegeen in laga yaabo in Taiwan looga galo sabab la xiriira in iska difaaco dambaasi kasta oo yimaada Taiwan tan iyo 1949 wuxuu ahaa maamul dhinac u go'an oo doonaya aqoonsi caalamiya qaramada kuma laha laakiin waxaa jira dalal badan oo arrimo difaaci dhinaca ganacsiga kala shaqeeya waxaana dowladda dalka Mareykanku ay u aragtaa in tijaabadan hadda tijaabisay markuu ugu badan ay ka iibisay ay noqon doonto waxa ay ka fili doonto Shiinaha inuu asagoo wax talaabo u qaado oo ka dhan aagga loo yaqaano Indo-Pacific region ama gobolka Indo-Pacific ee badda Pacific uu marto ayaa Mareykanku u taqaanaya inuu talaabo weyn ku yeesho ama saameynta wuxuu ku yeesho Shiinuhu wuxuu u arkaa jasiiradaasi inay tahay dal ka mid ah dalkiisa dhinaca kalena iyadoo oo ay jirtay dhawaanaha oo dhan hadahayntii ku saabsaneyd cilaaqaadkii dhex maray Somaliland iyo Taiwan ayaa waaxda National Security Council annaha national security councilka ee dalka maraykanka dabcan waa waaxda amniga qaranka barteeda ay ku leedahay twitterka ayaa waxaa lagu soo sheegeeyey warbixintaas waxaa rabaa meesha doonaya inaad si fiican fahantaan dad badan oo asxaabteena oo meel walba jooga hargeysa meel walba soo weydiiyey waxaa rabaa markaa in arrintaas sida ay tahay aan usoo koobo goobta qof kuma saxeexnaa hadalka ay dowladda maraykanku meesha ku qortay waxaa weeye waa waaxda dhinaca national security councilka ay ku leedahay waa waaxda amniga qaranka maraykanka barta ay ku leedahay twitterka ayaa waxaa lagu soo qoray hadalka ama sida loo fasiri karo waxaa weeye waa wanaag inaynu aragno taiwan oo dedejisay qaaday tallaabooyin markaasi saddexgal ah oo ay ku markaasi socday bariga afrika ayaa layidhi wakti markaasi jirtay baahi aad u muhiim taiwan waa saaxiib ballaaran marka ay noqoto arrimaha dhinaca caafimaadka waxbarashada iyo weliba dhinaca waxaa layidhi farsamada iyo maarata istaageysa dhinaca farsamada iyo arrimo kala badan intaas ayay horta dowladda maraykanka ku sheegtay waxaa halkaa ka cad taiwan masoo hadal maraykanka masoo hadal qaadin somaliland dabcanna waxa ay soo markaa fasirtay inay saas u jeedaan somaliland u jeedaan waxaa lagu soo sheergareeyey warbixin ay ka qortay cilaaqaadka dhex maray somaliland iyo taiwan ay ka qortay wargeyska esnews.com la yirahdo ama barta esnews.com la yirahdo ayaa lagu soo ayaa qofkan ama qofkii hadalkaa qoray oo aan qof hadalka qof ma saxay ama saa idin sheegay ayuu soo sheergareeyey linkigaas ayuu intaa ku daray oo yidhi markaas inay yani ay samaysay arrimahaas dhexgalka inay halkaas qaaday wargeyska markaa wuxuu qoray wargeyska markaa waxa uu qoray maraykanku dabcan wuxuu wuxuu ogeyn in ay kulmeen wasiirka arrimaha dibadda somaliland wasiirka arrimaha dibadda taiwan sidoo kalena ay arrintan tahay arrin markaasi ku noqon karta yidhahdeen cadaadis shiinaha ku noqon karta cadaadis waa arrin cadaadis ku noqon karta shiinaha ayay dhaheen ama wargeysku uu sheegay arrintaas barnaamijka ay waxaan ku fiiri doonaa deeqayno dabeeshana qiimaha leh طبعا كيس وبحثوا إذا سيدنا سكوكم وراك وعلى اللي عدنا سيدنا كسرنا الصوت ليس أي يوم مكر هو جاي رئيس وزراء إسرائيل بنجامين نتنياهو وحال الشيء إذا قالها إسرائيل واللي أي كلمة كحرام كفاضرا وسوي المفروض يخلوا ضد بنا بحيا يا رئيس وزراء كم بنا بحيا كوا سوشيالي اللي يكونوا قلنا إسرائيل معي إن أهون توجهوا أيوة الشيء إن حرام كفاضرا ما تكرر هذه هذا دروم مقطعين ومدحوين أبد وزراء وكذب الجالسين يروح كفاض قال كذا رحمنا بلا وزير أي حتى كل ذي إن حبابه الأرض صلح وزراء بريء ولا ولا wadaagga ayaa u muuqata in ay soo jahayso cadaadis xoogan ayadoo mar walba qolada gadaalka ka soo geystay arrinta uu ka mid yahay Kenny Kent ay ku eedeeyaan xukuumaddii ka horreysay iyo kulli wasiirada ka horreeyay inay ayaga yihiin kuwa shaqada kale dabaasha qiimaha leh qaybta labaad wararka caalamka ee abdurasiid dadtay
Good morning. Howard Welby, Director of the Wilson Center's Africa Program, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you this morning on behalf of the Wilson Center's program and also Enough Project, a jointly co-sponsor initiative. For those of you who are familiar with the center, just briefly, the center was established in 1968 by an act of Congress as a living memorial to President Woodrow Wilson. He was our first American president to have a PhD and was university president for the science professor. And the center aims to fulfill his mission of bridging the gap between the world of ideas and the world of policy. We're a nonpartisan institute for advanced study and we perform open, serious, and informed dialogue on every conceivable global and national issue. We're very fortunate this morning to have three best experts around to discuss what is characterized by many as perhaps the most intractable conflict and most difficult situation in the African continent in many ways. The Somalian case. I am anxious to hear the insights of our presenters this morning. We're going to hear from Chris Alban-Lackey, who is a senior researcher in the Africa Division of Human Rights Watch, where he covers the Horn of Africa. Chris received his BA in political science from Boston University and a JD from Columbia Law. served as a Peace Corps volunteer with Ethiopia and Madagascar. Harun Hassan is a Somali journalist and writer based in Washington and has worked for the BBC and for the Associated Press. He holds a master's in international journalism and studied at the City University in London. And thirdly, Ken Minkaus, who is a professor at Davidson College since 1991, who teaches political science. Ken specializes in the Horn of Africa politics, and primarily in development, conflict analysis, peace building, and political Islam. He's the author of over 50 articles, book chapters, and monographs, several of which address Somali or Horn of Africa politics. I don't know if there's any discussion as to who will be going first. Okay, we'll be leading off then this morning with Ken Metcalf. Our participants to try to contain the remarks of 10-15 minutes so that we can then open it up in a free-flowing Q&A. He's going to shoot me away after the microphone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Howard. When you introduce the Woodrow Wilson Center and President Wilson, you will always forget to mention that he spent a year at Davidson College, where he teach before Princeton poached him. So we like to claim him. He's on all of our brochures. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to talk about a very disturbing subject right now, the situation in Somalia. We're here essentially to ring you what's on there.
والله صوبت استحضره والله شكل عوضه غير حسنته.
Through the full body of them in the time we have. The situation in Somalia right now is disastrous across the board in terms of the level of the humanitarian crisis, in terms of humanitarian access, in terms of the scope and extent of brutality of the armed conflict, in terms of the lack of any governance, and in terms of radicalization in the Somali society. This is not just more of the same bad news that you've heard about Somalia for 17 years. We're going to argue that some of these changes represent seismic changes in Somalia, whole new levels of threats to Somalia and to Somalia's long-term stability and to our own security. This is the exact opposite outcome of what the U.S. and Western countries intended and wanted a couple of years ago when we embarked on a new set of policies.
يوروب ثاني وصبح تعود مرة ما هو وصبح هذا ياسين سوق وري الجزيرة ضحى الحين قربت من الأغاني
The car bombs exploded simultaneously near a hotel and a police department headquarters in the capital, Mogadishu.
مجموعة
Three bombs ripped apart a minibus. Victims' bodies were scattered on the street.
I pulled many dead bodies from the burning cars. One of the cars exploded next to a public transportation vehicle. There were many people in it, including women and children. The number of casualties is unknown. His bodies are still being pulled from the burning cars.
Witnesses say gunmen tried to storm the Sahafi hotel by blowing up the security wall. Security forces reportedly killed the gunman before they managed to enter the hotel.
It was 3 huge explosions. Up to now, we have found an ambulance carried 13 wounded people and 4 dead bodies, but we still don't know the exact number of dead. It may be more than 30.
The armed group Al-Shabaab is claiming responsibility for the attack. It's been trying to oust the UN-backed government for over a decade. Al-Shabaab has carried out deadly attacks against high-profile targets, including hotels and checkpoints in the
والله على النار حرام يا أخي لكم مساكين من الزرع وقدس قرح ما وفقكم والله سودو هذا عود لنا قرح سنة
When the truck arrived at the busy intersection known locally as K5, there was a traffic jam. Dozens of motorists stuck in their cars, hundreds of bystanders too. And so the explosion caused carnage.
This was the biggest explosion I've ever heard. The car exploded at the center of the busiest junction in Mogadishu. It caused huge destruction. I saw more than 20 dead people around the street, and there may be more than that in the collapsed building.
I've never seen a scene like this ever before. All the buildings around here have collapsed. There were close to 200 people in these buildings. I hope everyone is okay. K5 is in a bustling commercial district of Mogadishu with many shops, hotels, and businesses. It last happened outside the Safari Hotel, not normally used by government workers, so it's not clear whether the hotel itself was the intended target, or possibly the Somali Foreign Ministry nearby. It's emerged too that the police were actually following the truck at the time of the explosion.
الجزيرة العكتي كسمة الصومالي عود إلى الدور صاحبي يارو العقلة والله
Detonated in the city's Medina district. 2 people were killed there and the driver arrested. The group Al-Shabaab frequently launches gun, grenade, or bomb attacks in Mogadishu, despite being forced from the capital 6 years ago by African Union Somali troops.
والله إنك وحن لوسو ديو هوي ملامي
Constant worry
عبو ملامي
among Somalis.
قف مسلميون هين يابو
Al Jazeera.
والله سؤالها سويدي تاسوا صاحبي يارو اللي حمان قالوا بيلا قبقى مسلمين تي اللي دلاه
Fighting forces in Mogadishu since they were pushed out of their stronghold, the central Bukhara market. The youth, as Al-Shabaab translates, say their withdrawal in early August was just tactical. The Somali government sees things a little differently. On August the 6th, victory was declared. Mogadishu, President Sheikh Sharif Ahmed said, was free.
وأنا
But
كل الشقي
Al-Shabaab
يجرين
have stayed. Every year, the call to prayer goes out in this suburb of Suq al-Halaha. It announces an end to the month of Ramadan and the beginning of Eid. But this time, the rituals were organized and run by the strict Islamic group Al-Shabaab. Al Jazeera has been invited by Al-Shabaab to their Eid celebrations. Our reporter was taken to see the group's policemen and army clearly parading through the streets of the capital, albeit on the edges of the urban centre. And he was told this is not the only place where Al-Shabaab walks unhindered.
We control many parts of Mogadishu. In some places, we're fully in control and people can see our administration and our army. And we're in other places, secretly.
It's from these areas that Al-Shabaab say they will continue to fight against the government.
Some of them
الله ربنا تسكرف من إلهي قبقى مساكين أدو بينو زواركم
Many of his students are still here to continue to fight the enemy of Allah. Now Allah has given the Mujahideen the chance to choose a new leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, to continue leading the war against the enemy of Allah. And we will continue our war against the Crusaders alongside our brothers.
And this is the human impact of that fight. Houses damaged by African Union artillery a month ago in their attempt to keep Al-Shabaab out of the area. But Al-Shabaab insist they're going nowhere. The battles may have died away, but they're still marching to war. Rosie Garthwaite, Al Jazeera.
Al-Shabaab control almost half of Somalia with the barrel of a gun. The Islamist militant group have been waging war on successive governments for more than a decade. Their ongoing attacks and suicide bombs have killed hundreds of civilians in Somalia and beyond. In Somalia's drought-stricken southwest, deep in Al-Shabaab territory, they are trying a parallel tactic. It's a battle for hearts and minds, as they face a drought that the UN says could leave 6 million people at risk of famine. They have granted me rare access. You might not expect Al-Shabaab to have the head of humanitarian affairs, but here in Dola, the village, he's hard at work.
برك هناك وقعدت كده يا ابني يا جنوبي
With
وكذا
no rains here for 3 years, Sultan Al Muhammad says Al-Shabaab are stepping in where others have failed. But Western NGOs would be killed if they tried to access these areas.
حق يقول لي
It's
العقد
impossible
كذا
to
وانيو
independently
هذا
verify
قضى جبهة
how
بشيء
many
بدراسين
died from starvation in Al-Shabaab. The group says
ركبتها ما يشاء
some
مسكين
people have
تا
died of disease,
انت في اللي
but
يدلو
not from
بيلها
hunger.
يصبح
In the areas that were given access, Al-Shabaab were the only ones providing aid. But the reason is more complex than the group insists. Millions of Somalis live under Al-Shabaab rule. The group's policy is to keep the local population in their villages and bring aid to them, rather than let people leave their territory. NGOs say they are hamstrung by the dangers of operating in Al-Shabaab areas. In the past, they also accused the group of extortion, demanding taxes to work there, and could not be sure that aid was reaching civilians.
أنا كان لكم
Sultan
صورة
Al Muhammad's PR offensive is clear. He has his own film crew in tow
أرك
and
فيلم كدورة
grandparents
إن
make sure the militants branding
يلا ضوء
is in
فيلم كده
every shot.
صدقوا
As I speak to
صدقوا أنا
eight
محب في
recipients
عتا
under
مدة قرصة
Sultan's watchful eye, his narrative seems to be hitting home.
بعد والله كيف
She probably knew her passionate defense of the militants would be rewarded with extra rations. But her views seem to
أرك
be
أشجع
shared
حب
by
السعودية
many
هم
others
يتكاسوا
I
السعودية
spoke
إذا
to,
مسكين
who
تبغى ليش
also
يحكي
feel abandoned by the wider
أرك
world.
وش كاسي جيفتا كل يروح ما يتاجر ده مسكين ماشي أنا اللي يتاجر
Across
أولي ولا
Somalia,
يلمين
wealth and status are reflected through livestock, but animals are dying in huge numbers, and people are worried they will be next. I drove to a nearby water collection point behind Al-Shabaab's aid chief, but I kept my distance from his vehicle because the group's members are regularly targeted by US drone strikes. On the way, we were stopped by locals desperate for something to drink. This is the politics of water. Al-Shabaab controls supply here, so they control life. The militants are consolidating their support base by establishing reservoirs. Their water tankers drive into the drought-stricken area from rivers hundreds of miles away. Each family receives 5 jerrycans per day. And Sultan, with one eye on the camera,
هل أنت أخذ لا دي تدخل لك استعمار سبحان الله
In the last famine in 2011, Al-Shabaab lost support among the local population. Thousands fled their territory in search of food and water, but this time, the group's leaders say they have learned from their mistakes. I headed back to Doda village to a waterfall. Al-Shabaab might be gaining politically from this crisis, but they are losing money. The group raised revenue by taxing livestock, so every animal that dies is Al-Shabaab's loss too. And with wells dry, sometimes dirty water is all they have. Hundreds of Somalis have died of cholera. This makeshift clinic offers a brief respite from the brutal sun. The Quran says that Allah created all living creatures from water, and for Al-Shabaab, the drought is a punishment from him. If divine retribution is the cause, now might be time for divine intervention. Al-Shabaab want to show the world they are more than just a masked militia. Last week, their prayers were finally answered and the raids began. But for many, it will take much more to wash away Al-Shabaab's sins.
يا رب.
kulanti wacan oo wanaagsan saaxiibayaal idinkiiba meel kastoo aad dunida ka joogtaan halkani waa warqaadkiyu ku soo dhawaada barnaamij gaara aynu uga hadlayno
كون دريل مرة كواسن
halkaas islamarkaana lagu gudbiyey nooca ay noqonayso doorashada soomaaliya munaasabad maanta shirka lagu soo gebagabeeyey oo lagu qabtay magaalada dhuusamareeb ayaan si gaara u dul istaagi doonaa hadaladii madaxdu ay jeediyeen gaar ahaan kuwooda ugu muhiimsan mar kale saaxiibayaal jimco wanaagsan magaalada dhuusamareeb ee xarunta maamulka galmudug xalayto waxaa lagu soo gebagabeeyey shir maalmihii ugu dambeeyey halkaasi uga socday madaxweynaha dowladda federaalka iyo xubno ka tirsan maamul goboleedyada dalka iyadoo ay xusid mudan tahay shirkani inay ka bilaabiyeen madaxweyneyaasha puntland iyo jubbaland ugu dambeyn maantay munaasabad lagu soo xirayay heshiiskii xalay la gaaray ayaa lagu qabtay dhuusamareeb waxaana ka hadlay halkaasi madaxweyneyaasha maamul goboleedyada iyo madaxweynaha dowladda federaalka ee heshiiska gaaray dhammaantood mas-uuliyiintu waxay jeediyeen hadallo nuxurkoodu ahaa in laga wada shaqeeyo doorashooyin loo dhan yahay iyo in la joojiyo khilaafaadka oo ragaadinaya xilligan horumarka soomaaliya madaxweynaha dowladda federaalka mudane maxamed cabdullaahi farmaajo oo khudbad dhinacyo badan taabanaysa ka jeediyey kulanka ayaa si baraxla waxa uu kaga hadlay halka uu kasoo bilowday khilaafka kala dhexeeya madaxda maamul goboleedyada sida hadda qaarkood loo dhameeyey iyo sababta uu ku doortay in la aado doorasho dadban balse ka dad badan xilligii 2016 ha yeeshee waxaan ku horeynayaa madaxweynaha dowlad goboleedka galmudug axmed cabdi kaariyo qoorqoor oo martigeliya shirkan ayaa waxa ugu baaqay madaxda soomaalidu inay qayb ka qaataan isbeddelka dalka uu galayo isagoo tilmaamay inaan la joogin waktigii kala taagnaanta iyo khilaafaadka balse ay muhim tahay heshiiska la gaaray si wada jira in looga shaqeeyo isagoo sidoo kale tilmaamay inay diyaar u yihiin dowladda dhexe iyo dowlad goboleedyada shirkan gaaray cid kasta ee ka aragti duwan inay qanciyaan
waxaan leenahay walaalayaal qof kasta oo soomaaliyeed hadduu yahay mas-uuliyiinta asaga ama tilmaamay mas-uulka soomaaliyeed waxaan soo dhaweynaynaa taladiisa tilmaantiisa كفر يسولاك كيف تشوف المنطقة الصومالية على وجه تمام إلى من الأمامين إلى
بنت الشيء أرك برقر حسن دايرة وش سوداي ويا يوحوق وانا أوكي يا
حنا ضمن دورش وقلي دورش مع وحي هذا
ترجيل دخل من منتشر ما حسست حوالي شوية مش خير
معها شاشتك حقنا وحاليا ودكتوريتا
maxamed cabdullaahi farmaajo madaxweynaha dowladda federaalka oo hadal dheer ka jeediyey goobta ayaa ka sheekeeyey heerka uu gaaray khilaafkii kala dhexeeya dowlad goboleedyada iyo sida uu doonayay in loo xaliyo isagoo sidoo kale iftiimiyey sababta uu ku doortay noocan doorasho ee la qaatay
التوبة بين لواتا الجسم حوش الدرويزة ده عقبت اليوم الدروب شيء الجسم حوش الدرويزة استغفر الله العظيم ودي ما كويس رون شيك عيب شيك وما هم بيلو سياسة قصيلة حيوة والله ولقي برك بدعويرة عالم بس قصلة كل جزانة استغفر الله العظيم محد دولة قطر دي لو قصبة اسكب حنو مريحان بلايا بعوز كل سومالي مريحانة كليتهم سيروا دورا زاد أنا جستني وقاعدين وقت الشعوب أنت وتجي له رئيس الوزراء دي رعديس مركين لو دور تعرفها ولقي ماركن كم وحك حيوان سو والله
guud ahaan wanaagitaas barnaamijkii gaarka ahaa aynu kaga hadlaynay arrimaha doorashada soomaaliya iyo shirkii lagu soo xiray magaalada dhuusamareeb ee gobolka galgaduud mid lamid intaynu ku kulmayno nabadgelyo
وكنا خير شو دوم يوم كان هو عقل
German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel is in the Somali capital Mogadishu to meet the country's leaders. Gabriel was welcomed by his counterpart Yusuf Garad Umar and Prime Minister Hassan Ali Khaire during his visit. The German Foreign Minister said his country had provided nearly $77 million in aid and said it was willing to double the
العكس
amount.
غير كان وياه
Gabriel's visit came ahead of the London conference on Somalia. Somalia's new government faces challenges that include the Al-Shabaab extremist group in a drought that has hundreds of thousands of people on the brink of starvation.
Germany so far provided close to 70 million euros, and we are prepared to at least double that figure.
العكس للشيء
We are very grateful for the government of Germany for their unwavering support to the government of Somalia and its people.
شحال كانت تدوات مليون وفينا رواج لك هل حد ممكن هلعب
Independence in 1960. Ever since that time until now, Germany has been a great friend and a donor to the people of Somalia, and today we are very happy to receive Germany's foreign minister who came here for our assistance at this critical time.
Honorable Prime Minister of the Federal Republic of Somalia, Madam Chair of the Committee of Ambassadors, Dean of the ACP Ambassadors, Excellencies, representatives of missions, Secretariat staff, distinguished guests, salam. The Committee of Ambassadors is honored to have with us this afternoon the Honorable Hassan Ali Khaire, Prime Minister of the Federal Republic of Somalia, a man of vision and action, who has worked extensively in the field of humanitarian services. After successfully completing his studies at the University of Oslo in Norway and the Edinburgh School of Business in Scotland, Prime Minister Høyre began his social work in 2002 as project coordinator at the Norwegian Refugee Council. He briefly left the NGO sector for a few years to pursue management of development projects. An accomplished entrepreneur, he returned to the NGO sector where he worked for 9 years, moving up the ranks to eventually become regional director for the Horn of Africa. In this position, he demonstrated dynamic leadership and more specifically, that he was a man of vision and action. In fact, it was as the regional director for the Horn of Africa that Prime Minister risked his life during a mission in June 2002, when his caravan was targeted by armed men on the border between Somalia and Kenya. As a member of the large Somalian diaspora, Prime Minister Hassan Ali Kire helped to empower communities of Somali origin in many Western countries, especially Norway and the United Kingdom. In 2013, based on his success and experience, our distinguished guest joined the petroleum industry. He was appointed Executive Director for Africa at the British company Soma Oil and Gas, where he was tasked with revitalizing oil exploration efforts in Somalia. Noted for his professionalism and integrity, he was appointed Prime Minister of the Federal Republic of Somalia on 23rd February 2017. Our distinguished visitor and Prime Minister has continued to work tirelessly towards stability and reconciliation for all Somalis. By forming an open government, inclusive of all the elements of the nation of Somalia, he has yet again illustrated his resolve to put the interests of the nation of Somalia first. Indeed, his intention and burning desire is to serve the interests of all the people of Somalia, and in addition, to serve those of his country's regional and international partners. Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished guests, allow me to close by expressing to the Honorable Ali Hassan Høyre, Prime Minister of the Federal Republic of Somalia, my sincere wishes for success in his high-level mission to secure peace, prosperity, and lasting progress for the Somali nation, and to convey what a great pleasure it is for the ACP Secretariat, your family, our family, and I to receive so outstanding and accomplished a guest with us this afternoon. Thank you for your kind attention. Shukran.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General.
لكن اللي بحث
It is
صومالي
my distinct pleasure to invite His Excellency Mr. Hassan Ali Kire, the Prime Minister of the Federal Republic of Somalia, to address the Committee of Ambassadors. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr.
صدق
Secretary
موضوع
General,
نرويجيان انجليز صومالي
ambassadors, distinguished guests,
ما
ladies
جينا
and
حيطان
gentlemen.
انجليزي صومالي انجليزي كيس حتى
I want to
جاي
start
جواب
first by thanking you, Madam Chair and Secretary General, for inviting me. And I, of course, do feel home. It looks like home here, seeing the people I see. But I must admit that I would be really very glad to be welcomed by the chairperson here, but to be introduced by the Secretary General. So next time when I'm traveling, if I can ask you to come here, that would be very good. Briefly, when I listened to you, I actually felt that that was me you were talking about, but I don't think I'm that good. But it is an honor and privilege to be here. As a founding member of this important organization, I am very proud to be able to join my brothers and sisters.
bal waan dhahayan wuxuu ku waashay mataqaanaa dulood bisoo ku waashay kana soomaaliya wuxuu yidhi isku mid baa ayaa dadka wallahi dadka qaar qabiila qaaday asaga iyo daahir calasow iyo koob duqbilo lahay oo hadda isbitaal galaya maraykanka maarkiba ilaahay cafada siiyo walaalkan waa u duceynaynaa laakiin farmaajo oo wuxuu ahaa jiray dabadhilif
Now, as a proud member of the organization, I represent a nation that you've heard about over the past 30 years. But we're going to go back a little first and start from where we started. We're going to start from early 50s and 60s. Somalia, who then was the first African democratic nation, the lead nation within our continent, found itself at a later stage a nation that has seen a lot of problems. When we talk to people, they remember Somalia of terrorism, pirates, and humanitarian challenges and famine. There was a Somalia that was the frontier of African democratic leadership, rule of law, and development, supported a number of other African countries to see their independence. Some of them who might be here. But then that history seemed to be lost and forgotten for a while. But we are here to reclaim that history. We're here to restore that origin of our nation and heal the wounds of the past 30 years. I am very grateful for Madam Chair's introductory remark of our president, who has been elected a little over a year ago. That election is a new hope and a light in our country and for the Somali people. So I'm going to tell you what we've been doing for the past year and a half or so, year and 3 months. And I will tell you a little bit of our expectations and how we, those of us from the 3 different continents that this organization represents, how we should support one another and move our parts of the world forward. To rebuild our nation, our government now works on 3 major pillars that we concentrate on. The first one, because we are fighting terrorism, we're trying to rebuild the security institutions of our country. But for us, we have a new definition in terms of how to fight Shabab and terrorism. Fighting terrorism for us through military means will not solve the problems that we Somalis face. Simply because we're fighting an enemy from within. You're fighting people who are your cousins and brothers and sisters who live within you, within your village, who are not be able to be distinguished from the ordinary citizens who go to work in the morning and come home in the evening. That's why for us to fight terrorism means to provide good governance, to fight corruption, to promote a culture where a government can have legitimacy and trust from its people, to ensure that there's an open and transparent allocation of resources, to have a justice model and system where people can feel comfortable, to make the government of Somalia be accountable to the people, a government that provides services to its people so that we seek legitimacy from our people and not from international outfits. Rebuilding our nation in terms of providing security for us means seeking acceptance from our people. Security, therefore, for us means we start from scratch, build step by step, and that is what our president and the rest of the leadership of the country has been doing. And over a year now, a period over a year, we've made significant strides and continue to move that nation forward. We cannot rebuild our security institutions without mentioning our brothers and sisters from the continent, the African Union, the AMISOM, whom some of them are here. Because of them and their services to our people and the sacrifices they made for the past 10 years, Somalia sees now a future that hasn't been possible 10 years ago, or even 7 or 6 years ago. They paid the ultimate price. And we don't want their sacrifices to be in vain. That's why the President and I are committed to ensure that we restore the credibility and the dignity of the Somali people, so that people know Somalia, not what it is today, or what it has been over the past 30 years, but what it can be. To continue with that, we've been reforming the economy of the country because we've had a bad credit for more than 30 years. Zero access to the national financial institutions, no financial system that worked. But we had one thing that functioned in that country where nothing else to be found. For close to 30 years, when every institution of our country were destroyed in the early 90s, the productivity and the ingenuity of the Somali people never stopped because of the capacity of the Somali business community, both inside and outside the country. And they kept alive our nation because you have this business structure that is built on one thing. That was the reason why our government was destroyed. With our business community has and had it for that 30 years, and that is trust among them. And that is the trust we are trying now to restore in our economy. Restore with international financial institutions. Our country has a debt of more than $5 billion. That comes from the old regime, early 70s and 80s. And for a year or so now, we've satisfied every criteria that the national financial institutions with a specific focus of IMF and the World Bank has. And now there's this major potential for our nation to reach pre-arrears clearance now in June or July, short period arrears clearance with a long objective and focus on the debt relief. Rebuilding our financial institutions, reforming our central bank, promoting our business community, creating jobs, and developing our nation so that we have an infrastructure that allows our other African brothers and sisters can come to our country and rebuild it together with us. We say this because we don't see us poor. We see us nation with a lot of potential. Longest coast in the continent, potential in oil and gas, minerals, in fishing, agriculture, services and logistics, geographical location, you name it. A nation with a lot of potential that have had a problem. So the way we see and approach the world for us now is not to ask for handouts. We ask them who's willing to do business with us. I understand that is the foundation under which you're guided as an organization. So we hope that in a very near future, there will be a lot of people from our neighbors and other countries in our different continents that will join and come and take part of our country's rebuilding efforts, but at the same time, take advantage of the potentiality of our nation because we see for us in the very near future, the Somalia that will play a very